Hi everyone, my name is Nick, and today we're going to talk about uncommon alternatives to your standard common houseplants. So whether you've been growing houseplants for a couple of months or a couple of years, I'm sure you're going to be pretty familiar with many of these basic houseplants. But perhaps you've grown a little bored of them and you're looking to try something newer and exciting, or maybe you just love these plants and you're just trying to branch out and try something else. I'm going to talk about today plants that are in the same genus or group as these common houseplants that are just a little bit more difficult to find, a little bit more uncommon, and a little bit more exciting perhaps. So I think a great example to start out with today would be with the golden pothos. So this is Epipremnum aureum right here, so just to be a little bit more specific with the science. Epipremnum is the genus, and Aureum is the species. So Epipremnum aureum is the scientific name of this plant, and this is the golden pothos. This is one of the most standard, common houseplants out there, and of course that's for good reason. This plant is ridiculously easy to grow, and this plant is responsible for turning so many homes into that urban jungle vibe. So this is a plant that nobody should be sleeping on because this is a really incredible common plant that will just vine for days. This thing can grow, I'd say, over a foot a month if it's in the right conditions during the growing season, which is bright light. But this one I have growing on my bookcase in a rather dark corner of my home, and you can see it's quite small and fuller rather than longer and viney. So I kind of appreciate the look of this. But if you are looking to grow your home into an urban jungle, this is the plant that you want. Now, there are so many types of Epipremnum aureum out there. This is just the standard golden pothos, but there's also the marble queen pothos, which sports some white variegation. There's the neon pothos, which has some lemon lime foliage. There are so many types of pothos out there. If you walk into a plant store, you're going to find a bunch of different types. However, there are some other types of Epipremnum out there that are just as easy to grow as this incredible plant that are just a little bit more difficult to get your hands on. So I think a great example of that is this Cebu Blue pothos right here, which they call, or its scientific name is Epipremnum pinnatum Cebu Blue. So this one's Epipremnum pinnatum, while this one's Epipremnum aureum. So they are very, very closely related plants, but they are different in the specifics. So they're different species, which I think is quite wonderful. So if you can grow this golden pothos, I'd say without a doubt, you can grow the Cebu Blue pothos. So I'm just gonna put the golden pothos down for a second. This same exact care as a golden pothos. I grow this in darker corners of my home. Of course, if you grow it in brighter areas of your home, it's gonna grow a little bit more faster and fuller, but it's a really lovely houseplant. It's a really easy one to grow. Like I said, if you can grow the golden pothos, you can grow this one. This is a super easy plant to propagate. You can see it's got all these little aerial roots all over the place. So if you have a friend with a Cebu Blue pothos, if you ask them nicely enough, or if you give them a plant to trade back, if you just take a cutting of one of the vines and make sure that these little aerial roots are submerged in water or soil, this thing will root up super fast, and really one cutting is all you need to get a nice full plant down the line. So a really incredible houseplant that is fortunately very easy to grow. So let's talk about some other ones today. Ooh, okay, so let's talk about this one right here. So this is a Hoya. This is a Hoya CARNOSA Crimson Queen. So this is one of the most common Hoyas on the market. Now this one's just a standard green Hoya CARNOSA that has the white around the edges. So you might have, as I was saying, a standard Hoya CARNOSA that's just plain green. You might have a Hoya CARNOSA Crimson Princess, which has more of a like creamy variegation going down the center of the leaf. But this one's Crimson Queen, which is the one with the white around the edges. So a bunch of different types of very common Hoya on the market, specifically Hoya CARNOSA. So similar to how there are a bunch of different types of Epipremnum aureum, the golden pothos, there are a bunch of different types of Hoya CARNOSA. This one just happens to be a different variety. But this is, as I said, one of the more common types of Hoya, and one that you will pretty much find in every houseplant store nowadays. But people are loving their Hoya, and they want to find ones that are a little bit more interesting and out there. So I'm also going to talk about today this Hoya obscura. So this is a very, not the most showy Hoya, but if you get a little bit closer to the foliage, if I can find some good leaves, it has some really nice veination to them. And of course, if I gave this plant a little bit more sunlight, I'm sure it would get a little bit more pronounced in that veination, but I have this one kind of hidden amongst plants in a windowsill, so it's not receiving scorching sunlight, it's more so receiving dappled sunlight. But Hoyas are very easy to grow when it comes to lighting. I grow them up to about 6 feet away from my windows without artificial light added. Keeping in mind, I do have southern facing windows throughout most of my home, and in my hemisphere, that is a lot of light. So, you know, if you're dealing with north facing windows, I probably wouldn't push it up to 6 feet. I'd probably keep them in the windowsills, but if you are working with brighter light in your home, Hoyas are a lot of fun to grow because you can really scatter them throughout your home. And they all look very similar, but also have many differences to them as well. If we had a couple more Hoyas here to talk about today, you would see some pretty clear differences. But I think this is a great example of a Hoya that's a little bit more difficult to get your hands on. Not necessarily an expensive Hoya. I know that some Hoyas have really been skyrocketing in price lately, but I don't believe Hoya obscura is one that carries that price tag. But just one that's a little more difficult to find, and if you are starting to collect Hoya, or maybe you have a couple of Hoya carnosa around and you're trying to find something new, I would highly recommend trying out Hoya obscura. It's a really lovely plant, and if you give it a little bit more sunlight than I'm giving it, I'm sure that not only would the venation be a little bit more pronounced, but it would probably get some kind of red sun stress to the leaves that would be quite gorgeous. So, happy to talk about this one today. And let's move on to this right here. This is a rather common philodendron. This is Philodendron Brasil right here. So this is known for just kind of its standard philodendron shaped leaf, but having a little bit of lemon lime variegation running down the center of the leaf, which is great. It's a beautiful houseplant. I remember when I first started getting into plants, I fell in love with Philodendron Brasil, and it was one that I just absolutely loved growing in my home, and it was one of my most prized plants. But the years go by, and you know, sometimes Philodendron Brasil isn't just going to do it for you anymore. So fortunately, it's a very easy plant to grow, and many philodendrons are very easy to grow. Of course, if you get to the more collector ones, it's going to get a little bit more difficult. But many philodendrons that you find on the market are very easy to grow. So not only is this Philodendron Brasil extremely easy to grow, but I would also say that this Philodendron radiatum is also very easy to grow. So this is a little bit more of an out there philodendron. It looks kind of similar to Philodendron mayoi, a slightly different leaf shape, and the stems, or the petioles, I'm sorry, are all green without that red coloration that mayoi has. So similar in that look, but just a little bit of a different plant. And if I gave this plant something to grow, I know that these leaves would really grow in size. But unfortunately, I just don't have the space in my home to give this the most prime conditions for it to grow to its fullest potential. But as I've had this for, I'd say probably about a year and a half at this point, I have had some fun growing this plant. I really love the way that it's kind of, you know, started to go over the side of the pot and just kind of reach all over with these fun shaped leaves. So it kind of reminds me, like I said, of Philodendron mayoi. It also kind of reminds me of a much smaller version of Thematophyllum by Pinnatufidum, which is a little bit more commonly referred to as Philodendron hope or Philodendron cellulum, if you're at all familiar with that. So I think it's quite lovely that that monstrous plant is kind of simplified into this little plant right here, Philodendron radiatum. But as I said, I could grow this plant to become much bigger and have much more potential. I'm unable to give it that right now, but philodendrons are all the rage right now. I know that philodendrons are skyrocketing in price. A lot of the ones that people really want to get their hands on, like Melanochrysum and Varicosum, are ridiculous prices that I don't even want to see. But I haven't really heard about Philodendron radiatum, and I don't really see much about it, so I'm sure it's out there. I found it for a very cheap price, so I'm sure you guys can find it for a very cheap price as well. So a really super fun philodendron that I never hear about, that I really do think deserves a little bit more attention, and like I said, is very easy to grow. If you can grow that Philodendron Brasil or your standard heartleaf philodendron, you can grow Philodendron radiatum. I can promise you that. Let's see. Okay, so this right here is a super common Peperomia. This is Peperomia tetragona, a really wonderful Peperomia as well. I know some of the more common Peperomias have less beautiful foliage, let's say, but this is one that I think is really striking and beautiful. However, it is extremely common. You can find this in pretty much any houseplant store that you walk into, fortunately, because it is such a gorgeous plant. But there are other Peperomias out there. Peperomia is a super rich genus in species. There are over 1,000 species in that group of plants, and they all look so vastly different. While some of them do look very similar as well, and some of them look so similar you can't even tell them apart, which is probably why there's over 1,000 species. But it's a really incredible group of plants that if you don't already grow, I highly recommend growing. But this is an incredible example right here of a common Peperomia, but I want to share with you guys one that's a little bit less common, still not ridiculously hard to get your hands on, sorry. It's in a hanging basket. I have to really gingerly pull it up here. This is Peperomia. Oh, I'm just not setting myself up for success right now. This is Peperomia quadrangularis. Sometimes they call this Peperomia angulata, and I love this Peperomia. This one is definitely in my top 5 of my Peperomias, and I collect Peperomias, so I have quite a few. And this one, you know, I have plenty of other rarer Peperomias in my home, but this one is definitely a more uncommon Peperomia, and it's a really, really wonderful one. I've been growing this one in my home for probably about 2.5 years now, and it's just so incredible the way it's just kind of filled out, and it's just an absolute waterfall of plants. So I really wanted to talk about Peperomia quadrangularis today, because I really think it does remind me very much of Peperomia tetragona, but it's just a little bit more put together. So tetragona is a little bit more pointy, it's a little bit more like silver blue glaucous color, it grows more upright, because that's just the way that the plant grows before it starts to trail, because the stem's got to get too heavy for it to fall over. Well, Peperomia quadrangularis is more green, it's more dulled, it's more light and traily. It doesn't really grow upright. This is pretty much as tall as it grows right here before it gets too heavy and falls over. So I just think it's a little bit more of a put-together version of Peperomia tetragona, and I actually do grow these directly next to each other in my home because I love seeing like how similar but also how different they are from each other. So that's the joy of Peperomias. Peperomias are more succulent houseplants than like the Philodendrons that I've been talking about. These would be watered more similar to like the Hoya, where you do want to let them dry out. You don't want to forget about them, but I'd say I probably give this plant water once a week. Mind you, it's hanging directly inside a western-facing window, so it does get a good amount of light, but this thing seems to really like once-a-week waterings, as well as my Peperomia tetragona, as long as they're getting good enough light. If you are putting your Peperomias in a little bit of a darker situation, I'd say you'd probably be watering them like every 10 to 14 days, but if you go too dark, you might have them rot. And some of these plants are just so beautiful. You really do want to give them prime real estate, because in a couple of years' time, you're really going to have a nice full plant. And I'm psyched to watch this one grow over the next couple of years. Sorry, I'm realizing I'm just kind of like oogling over my quadrangularis, but I love it. So can you blame me? And let's talk about one more today. So this is an Anthurium, ANDRAEANUM, and this is just a very common type of Anthurium. Mine has white flowers. I know the most common type of Anthurium has red flowers or sometimes pink, and they commonly refer to it as flamingo flower. It's got a very similar look to a peace lily, but a little bit different. The foliage is a little bit thicker. It's a little bit more deliberate in the way that its foliage grows, where a peace lily is just kind of more just like a bush. So I really appreciate that about these Anthuriums. I think that this is another plant that people shouldn't be sleeping on, because these leaves are gorgeous, and when the plant flowers, it's quite nice. Not a lot of your plants in your home flower, so it's really nice when you have a little flora to go with the foliage. I don't know if that means the right thing, but anyway, before I make a fool of myself, so I want to talk about this Anthurium here. So this is Anthurium VEITCHII right here. So this is called the King Anthurium, and mine is a very underwhelming specimen of Anthurium VEITCHII, but if I continue to grow this plant for a couple more years, I'm sure the leaves are going to become much more elongated. So if you Google Anthurium VEITCHII or look on Instagram, I'm sure you're going to see some plants with leaves that are much longer. Mine, I think, are maxing out probably about 5 inches, but these things can keep on going to about 2 feet, if I'm not mistaken. So a plant that I've been babying over the last year that I've been growing it, but if I hold up these two plants together, you can really see the similarities in the foliage. Probably if I turn it to some of the more juvenile foliage, you can really see, hopefully that's good enough on camera, I can't tell, but you can see that the foliage is very, very similar. They're just different plants, they're different species. So while this is a much more common one, this is a little bit more of a hard to find Anthurium. And I think this one, I mean, when I first was growing houseplants, this was a very easy plant to get your hands on, but nowadays I feel like this is one that's like really hard to get your hands on. So I think the price has gone up. I haven't kept an eye out, but so just heating warning there. But it's such a fun houseplant. What I love about Anthurium is how the leaves grow in probably like the size of my thumbnail, and then they grow to this size, even when they're fully adults. Actually, I have behind me here, I know it's not a plant I'm talking about today, so pardon me that I'm getting slightly off topic, but I don't think you guys mind if I'm talking about plants. I have this Anthurium pedatoradiatum right here, which I'm kind of nursing back to health. And you can see this little tiny leaf that's coming in right here, and it has all these fingers. So hopefully in a week or two's time, the plant's going to be like the size of my hand, because that's where it was before. We will see, but just to kind of show you how small these leaves start at, and they can really grow out to a really nice full size. So just a little example I wanted to share with you guys there. I know a little bit off topic, I do apologize, but anthuriums are really interesting. I know a lot of people are really obsessed with the anthuriums that have like the leathery dark green foliage and like the silver throughout the leaves, but I think that these anthuriums are just a little bit more exciting, but that's just my opinion, of course. But I am kind of into the plants that are a little bit more visually undemanding, so that's just something I appreciate about my plants. Anyway, I think that's going to about do it for this video. I'm starting to get very off topic, so I'm just going to cut it off now. But I really appreciate you guys sticking around for talking about uncommon alternatives to your basic houseplants. So thank you guys so much for joining me today. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at PhillyFoliage, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great day!